Hey y'all, this is Mrs. Watkins, and this is Chapter 1, the Spatial Perspective. This PowerPoint goes with your guided notes, so please have those out and be filling in the blanks that go directly with this PowerPoint. You will see the blanks on your notes will also be underlined in the PowerPoint, so it should be pretty easy for you to figure out what you should write. Also, this goes right in line with your AMSCO textbook. Go ahead now and watch this short video about what you can do with geography. Geography is all about looking at the world from different perspectives. It could be from a very localized perspective, like your yard, or from a very global perspective, like looking at something in terms of the entire Earth. By the end of this section, you will understand that geography as a field of inquiry looks at the world from a spatial perspective, and we're going to learn exactly what that means. Geographic information provides context for understanding spatial relationships and human-environment interaction. This chapter's essential question is, how does the way geographers look at the world differ from that of other scientists? Geography shares content with many other sciences. Geographers are interested in the phenomena studied by climatologists, botanists, economists, sociologists, and demographers, just for examples. Botany is the scientific study of plants. An economist offers authoritative insight on international news, politics, business, finance, science, technology, and the connections between them. Sociologists study society and social behavior by examining the groups, cultures, organizations, social institutions, and processes that develop when people interact and work together. Demography is the study of human population. These scientists study the weather, plants, business, human society, and the characteristics of populations. In this sense, geography is a science of synthesis, a field that integrates the learning of many others. And you're going to see that this year we're going to learn about all sorts of subjects. What distinguishes geography from all other fields is it focuses on a particular perspective or way of looking at things. That distinctive geographic perspective is spatial. Spatial simply means something relating to space. So the spatial distribution of population is all about where population is located. It's the way of identifying, explaining, and predicting the human and physical patterns and the connections of various locations. Geography's spatial perspective is an intellectual framework that looks at particular locations of specific phenomena, how and why that phenomena is where it is, and how it is spatially related to phenomena in other places. A spatial approach considers the arrangement of phenomena being studied across the surface of the Earth. Important considerations of this approach are things such as location, distance, direction, orientation, pattern, and interconnection. A spatial approach also looks at elements such as movements of people and things, changes in places over time, and even human perceptions of space and place. The spatial perspective. Geography is the why of where. Geographers ask questions about spatial distributions such as these. Why are things where they are? How did things become distributed as they are? What is changing the pattern of distribution? Geography as a field of study. Geography has been called the mother of all sciences because it incorporates so many different things. This is partly because it's one of the oldest fields of study. The word geography comes from Greek and combines the idea of studying or writing, which in Greek is graphy, with the idea of the earth, which in Greek is geo. So the word geography literally means earth writing. Because geography incorporates so many different things, there are a lot of subfields to geography. Physical geography is the study of elements of the physical environment, things like weather and climate. Physical geographers, like physical scientists, study topics such as weather and climate, ecosystems and biomes, and volcanism and erosion. Human geography is the study of spatial characteristics of humans and human activities, and that is what this class is all about. Human geographers share a spatial approach with physical geographers and often rely on information from physical geography and other physical sciences. Human geographers specialize in subfields. These subfields include geographers who study population, health, births, migration, etc. Culture, things like language, religion, popular music, folk traditions. Economics, things like agriculture, levels of development, wealth, etc. Urban areas, cities, suburbs, changes from growth, etc. Political things like local government, nations, distribution of power, and these are all the main topics that we're going to focus on this year in human geography. Take a second and watch this funny video clip from Jimmy Kimmel Live on the reason why geography is so important and how we are not doing a very good job of teaching it. Since geography studies spatial information, maps are one of the most important tools for geographers. Cartography, the art and science of map making, is closely associated with geography. Many geographers are also cartographers. Geographers rely on cartographers to help them organize spatial information. The early history of geography. For as long as humans have been able to write, they have written geographies in their descriptions of place and observations of phenomena on Earth. The first maps were probably simply scratched in the soil with sticks by early humans. The Romans and the Greeks were the first in Western Eurasia to have complex maps. Incidental mentions in Homer's books hint at geographic knowledge. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are geographic in nature and points to Greek interest in descriptions around the world, particularly around the Aegean Sea. However, scholars both ancient and modern are divided as to whether or not any of these places were real. The Greek philosopher Aristotle observed Earth's features and how they influenced human behavior, and he was really the first one to describe the Earth's shape as being spherical. Aristotle demonstrated that the Earth was spherical by observing eclipses and shadows of Earth and the Moon. He believed the closer you got to the equator, the warmer the temperature, based on people's skin coloring. The Greek mathematician, astronomer, and librarian Eratosthenes used geometry to calculate Earth's circumference. Eratosthenes coined the term geography and is known as the father of geography. Ptolemy, 500 years after Eratosthenes, summarized Greek knowledge of geography, including locations and sizes of continents. Ptolemy dominated European thought for 1,000 years. Europeans rarely ventured outside their region. After the fall of Rome in Europe is a period known as the Middle Ages. During this time period, there was constant warfare, and medieval kingdoms lacked trade, common language, and cultural diffusion. But the Muslim culture that flourished in the Middle East and North Africa built strong trading ties with Africa and East Asia. As people traveled, they collected information about new places, created maps, and wrote books about geography. Then comes the age of exploration. In July 1405, Zheng He was placed as the admiral in control of a huge fleet and armed forces. His Chinese armada consisted of a fleet of 317 ships holding almost 28,000 crewmen. Zheng He's fleet visited Brunei, Java, Thailand, and Southeast Asia, India, the Horn of Africa, and Arabia, dispensing and receiving goods along the way. Christopher Columbus. The historic and infamous voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492. Europeans launched a new era in exploration, description, and mapping. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He took 3 ships with him too, and called aboard his faithful crew. Mighty, strong, and brave was he, and he sailed across the open sea. Some people still thought the world was flat. Can you imagine that? What Columbus found was not an empty land, but instead a land that was full of very rich indigenous cultures. One important geographer of the early modern period was a Dutch scholar, Gerardus Mercator. Mercator created a world map in 1569 for sailors and is still widely used today. We'll learn more about the Mercator projection in Chapter 2. In the late 18th century, a German, Alexander von Humboldt, traveled extensively through South America. His study of the continent's wealth in plants and his detailed, accurate maps combined to spur European interest in the Americas. His vast work on botanical geography created the groundwork for the biogeographical field. But most importantly, Humboldt saw the world as a connected whole in which all types of knowledge contributed to each other. It is this approach that has inspired geographers ever since. Early efforts focused on the great themes of the discipline that had emerged up to that point, exploring, mapping, gathering data about physical and human geography, and seeking to analyze and understand the diversity of the world's regions. In the past century, Carl Sawyer explained the focus of geography beyond physical traits of the Earth to include human activity. Since then, geography has become increasingly diverse and specialized. Geographers study the spatial distribution of nearly everything to explain what people eat, to why they migrate, to how they vote. Historians look through the lens of time to understand the past. Geographers look through the lens of space to understand place. Location, absolute location, a point on the Earth's surface expressed by latitude and longitude using the system of coordinates. Absolute location is the precise spot something is according to some system, and in the case of geography, that system is latitude and longitude. The absolute location of Seattle is 47 degrees north latitude and 122 degrees west longitude. The most widely used way to pinpoint the absolute location is latitude and longitude. Latitude is the distance north or south of the equator, which is 0 degrees latitude. The equator is designated as 0 and the poles as 90 degrees north and 90 degrees south. Longitude is the distance east or west of the prime meridian, which is 0 degrees longitude. The prime meridian passes through Greenwich, England. Facts about lines of longitude. They are also known as meridians. They run in a north-south direction. They measure distance east or west of the prime meridian. This is the marking of the prime meridian at the Greenwich Royal Observatory in England. Here you see the markings of how far away each of these various cities is from the prime meridian. On the opposite side of the globe from the prime meridian is approximately 180 degrees longitude, which is known as the international dateline. The reason we say approximately is because the international dateline roughly follows this line, but makes deviations to accommodate international boundaries. Here you see the most important lines of latitude and longitude. How do we label lines of longitude? Well, if you go to the left from the prime meridian, those are degrees west. If you go to the right of the prime meridian, those are degrees east. As we said, the international dateline isn't exactly a straight line, and that's because it zigzags around land masses. There's not many places where that line actually touches land, thus allowing you to stand in both today and tomorrow and yesterday all at the same time. However, Fiji is one of those places where the international dateline does actually cross land, which means you can be standing in today and tomorrow at the same time. You do need to be able to locate the approximate latitude and longitude of various cities using maps. So here on this system, you can see that the absolute location of Mexico City is 19 degrees north latitude and 99 degrees west longitude. Again, using both of the latitude and longitude that you see in the red circles on the map. Relative location is where something is in relation to other things. For example, Salt Lake City, Utah's relative location is located just south of the Great Salt Lake and just west of the Rocky Mountains. Relative location is often described in terms of connectivity, how well two locations are tied together by roads and other links, and accessibility, how quickly and easily people in one location can interact with people in another location. Relative location can change over time and as accessibility changes. Example, ghost towns, which are abandoned settlements of some of the western United States, once had relative locations near water sources. Many of those water sources either dried up or were diverted away from those locations. Also, ghost towns could happen along trade routes or paths which changed. For example, when the interstate system was built here in the United States, many towns were abandoned that were on the smaller two-lane roads. Or ghost towns could happen near mines that have closed. Those ghost towns lost their relative location advantages, but their absolute locations remain the same. Place. The Taj Mahal is an enormous mausoleum complex commissioned in 1632 by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan to house the remains of his beloved wife, who died giving birth to their 14th child. The Taj Mahal is constructed over a 20-year period on the southern bank of the Yamuna River in Agra, India. Place refers to the specific human and physical characteristics of a location. One of the most outstanding examples of architecture which combines Indian, Persian, and Islamic influences. A group of places in the same area that share a characteristic form is a region. There are lots of different types of regions. There's regions that extend beyond country boundaries, but there's also regions within countries. There's also lots of different ways to create regions. A formal region is also known as a uniform or homogeneous region, is an area within which everyone shares in common one or more distinctive characteristics. The shared feature could be a cultural value such as common language or an environmental climate, such as the Sun Belt, as you see here on this map. It's named the Sun Belt because of the general climate associated with all of these places. A good example of a formal region could be Chinatown inside of San Francisco, California. It's a formal region because there's actual boundaries to where it begins and ends, and there are common characteristics found throughout. Some other formal regions include climactic areas like the Great Plains here in the US and the Pampas, grasslands found in South America. A functional region is also known as a nodal region. It's an area organized around a node or focal point. So it has a center, and the further you get from the center, the less of the characteristic you're going to find. A node is a central or connecting point. The characteristic chosen to define a functional region dominates at that central focus or node and diminishes in importance outward. This region is tied to a central point by transportation or communication systems or by economic or functional associations. An area around a radio signal or even a cell phone tower would be considered to be a functional region. The closer you are to that radio signal, the better you're going to get to that reception. The further you get away from it, the less and less you're going to be able to receive that signal. This map shows just that, the area in which a radio station is covered. The third type of region is known as a vernacular region or perceptual region. It's a place that people believe exists as part of their cultural identity, though your definition and my definition could vary. Such regions emerge from people's informal sense of place rather than from scientific models developed through geographic thought. This map is just a funny take on some people's version of vernacular regions. Same here. This is just another example of a one person's view of the United States, and these are their vernacular regions. Two ways to refer to place is site and situation. Site can be described as the characteristics at the immediate location. For example, the soil type, climate, labor force, and human structures. In contrast, situation refers to the location of places relative to its surroundings and other places. So situation is the location relative to surroundings. The situation of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia is roughly in the center of the Arabian Peninsula. Here you see Riyadh on this map. The situation of the Arabian Peninsula is between the continents of Africa and Asia. Related to the concept of place is a sense of place. A sense of place is a mental state, an emotional state. Sense of place is a feeling or perception held by people, not by the place. Places with a sense of place have a strong identity and character felt by the individual, which is why most people have their strongest sense of place for home. People also tend to perceive the characteristics of places in different ways based on their personal beliefs. For example, the characteristics of Rome, Italy might be described differently by a local resident than by an outsider, or by a Catholic than by a Hindu. This photo shows a busy cafe seen on the Cours Marbot, which is the main street of the center of Aix-en-Provence, France. You see this is located right on the border with the Mediterranean on the French Riviera. Here is another peaceful scene from the same town, and as you can see, cafes, people relaxing. This is how most people think of this city. Beautiful tree-lined streets. However, this same city also hosted Hellfest in 2014, and as you can see, these people's perception is going to be vastly different than those people we saw sitting at the cafe. Iron Maiden, Slayer, Black Sabbath are among the bands that performed. Here in the US, but growing abroad as well, we really are starting to see the distinctions between places, the uniquenesses between places are decreasing. And this is known as placelessness. So if a place inspires no strong emotional ties in people, it has that sense of placelessness. And many people consider this to be mostly the suburbs, where everything kind of looks the same. All of the big box stores are the same, all of the neighborhoods are the same, and so forth. So this placelessness lacks cultural uniqueness. This strip could be anywhere in the US. This picture again could be taken anywhere in the US. You would see this similar thing off of any interstate here in the US. Again, this is placelessness. While many associate placelessness with the American suburbs, there are other places as well that we see. This picture right here comes from Romania and the communist bloc housing types. This could really be anywhere in Eastern Europe. So Romania, as well as the other Eastern European countries, were formerly communist, and those block-style housings were built throughout. While there are parts of Japan where you may find placelessness, there are other parts of Japan where you're going to find a lot of cultural uniqueness. A traditional Japanese house in Kyoto, Japan. Now we'll move southwest to Indonesia and check out a traditional style house. Here we see a Lolafaso traditional house in Indonesia. As you will see, it's located on stilts. That's because Indonesia, being an island nation located in the Indian Ocean, experiences lots and lots of storms and lots of rainfall. And so for flooding reasons, you see the traditional houses built on stilts. What's also going to be common about traditional houses is they're going to be built out of materials from the local environment, as you can see here with the thatched roof and the wooden beams. Here in Georgia, we do see a lot of placelessness with the growth of the suburbs, but we too also have traditional style houses, especially from our colonial days. Here's just an example of one of those traditional plantation style houses that existed and still exist here in Georgia, but were built during the 1700s and early 1800s. Finally, locations can also be designated using toponyms or place names. Some toponyms provide insights into the physical geography, the history, or the culture of the location. Example, on the coast of Florida, you have lots of these place names, these toponyms that end with the word beach to describe what it's like there. Cocoa Beach, West Palm Beach, Fort Myers Beach, etc. Fernandina Beach not only describes the fact that it's a beach itself, but it also lends itself to Florida's Spanish past. We see Miami Beach, which is actually a barrier island located right off of the main coast. Pensacola Beach. We see Salt Lake City, Utah, which is named because of the salty lake located there. Iowa is named for a Native American tribe, just like many of the rivers and locations here in the South are derived from Native American words like the Chattahoochee and Alabama. Pikes Peak is named for the explorer Zebulon Pike. Some toponyms can be confusing, and here is some of the most interesting place names in the U.S. Place names around the world can also be confusing. We know that this island here is called Iceland, which most people would think means that it's full of ice, when in fact it's actually not. As you can see here, we see beautiful greenery in many parts of Iceland. Whereas next door in Greenland, you would think would be much more green, when in fact it's actually much more ice. Here's a picture of Greenland. While some are deceiving, like Lake City, Iowa, which is not on a lake. Few people consider Mount Prospect, Illinois, at an elevation of only 665 feet above sea level and a mountain. The importance of distance. A consideration of distance is an important part of the geographic perspective and spatial approach. Distance is the measurement of how far or how near things are to one another. The term proximity indicates the degree of nearness. This couple stood in close proximity so that they could both read the map. Distance can be measured in terms of geography and is given in a type of measurement such as meters, miles, or kilometers, which is the absolute distance. It may be straight line distance, which is known as the crow flies, or travel distance, using a route that turns and twists. Milwaukee to Kalamazoo is 130 miles by air, but 250 miles by car. Distance and time. Distance can also be measured in terms of time with relative distance. One place might be a 2-hour drive from another place. So absolute means the actual physical measure in terms of miles, kilometers, and so forth, whereas relative measures it expressed in terms of time, effort, or cost. Normally, when we're just talking about places, we use relative distance. For example, I have no idea how far in terms of miles it is to Hilton Head, but I know it takes about 6.5 hours. That would be relative distance. Relative distance can also change. For example, where is India? Yep, that's India. Now let's take a look at one specific city in India. Now take the city of Jaisalmer. Time-space compression is the shrinking in time and distance between locations because of improved methods of transportation and communication. 200 years ago, it would have taken months to get from the Americas to India, but today you can buy a plane ticket and be there within 43 hours. Time-space compression is constantly shrinking. We're always developing new technologies that are making it easier for us to get from point A to point B. Again, it used to take weeks and weeks to get between the west coast and the east coast of the US, and today it only takes a few hours. Here we see an example of this changing time-space compression between Edinburgh and London. In 1850, it would have taken 2 weeks by stagecoach. Today, barely 2 hours by air travel. New York and London are separated by an ocean, but the development of air travel greatly reduced time travel between them and now feel much closer today than in the 19th century. One other result of time-space compression is that global forces are influencing culture everywhere and reducing local diversity more than ever before. Today, because of radio, the internet, and other changes, people in the mountainous regions in Southeast Europe listen to the same music as everyone else in the world. The increasing connection between places is reflected in the growth of spatial interaction. Spatial interaction refers to the contact, movement, and flow of things between locations. Connections might be physical, such as roads, or they can be through information, such as through radios or internet service. Places with more connections will have increased spatial interaction. Geographically, we are further away from Japan than we are from Guatemala, but because Japan is connected like we are, we're going to have more in common with people in Japan than people in Guatemala. The friction of distance indicates that when things are further apart, they tend to be less well connected. This inverse relationship of time-space compression is called distance decay. The greater the distance, the less interaction. A clear illustration of this concept is the weakening of a radio signal as it travels across space from a radio tower. When a new pet store opens, its influence is strongest in the areas closest to the store, but only among the pet owners who have a connection to the store. Distance decay is less influential than it once was. Why? Improvements in transportation, communication, and infrastructure have reduced the friction of distance between places as they have increased the spatial interaction. So used to in history, distance decay was the most important factor. Today, though, we see that increased connections are actually going to make people have the most in common. The world is more spatially connected than ever in history. It allows a person living in El Paso, Texas, to shop at a store in New York City and receive a product shipped from a warehouse in Atlanta, Georgia. Manuel Casteels is a professor of urban geography at the University of California, Berkeley. Casteels has written a number of books and articles about geography of the city and the information society. He claims that we are passing from the industrial age into the information age. This historic change is brought about by the advent of new information technologies, particularly those for communication and biological technologies. Casteel's network society is a society in which communication technologies allow for the annihilation of space and for globalization. Density and distribution. Population density and population distribution. We see here on the left Monaco with 48,000 people per square mile, and over here on the right Mongolia with only 4.9 people per square mile. Density is the number of something in a specific defined area. Population density is the number of people per square mile. Densities are often compared to one another as higher or lower. The population density in a 10-acre city block of tall apartment buildings is likely higher than the population density of a 10-acre block filled with single-family homes. The more people per square area, the higher the density. The less people per square area, the lower the density. A simple population density for an area can be calculated by counting the people and dividing by the area. Besides describing density using numbers, density can be described in physiological terms. In a full elevator, one person might think it feels fine while one person feels uncomfortable. Density is not the same thing as overpopulation. In fact, some of the most dense places on Earth, like Tokyo, Japan, would not be considered overpopulated. Geographers are also interested in distribution, the way a phenomenon is spread out over an area. Some areas might have a cluster or concentration of something that is sparse in other areas. Here you see a picture of the Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas, which is going to have a much higher population density compared to the rest of the state. For example, two city blocks with the same density might have very different distributions. Evenly spread out versus high-rise apartment and empty park. Geographers look for patterns in the distribution of phenomena across space that gives clues about causes or effects of the distribution. Common patterns include the following. Linear. Phenomena are arranged in a straight line, such as the distribution of towns along a railroad line or river. Here we see a linear style settlement. A circular pattern is when phenomena are equally spaced from a central point, forming a circle, such as the distribution of homes of people who shop at a particular store. Many of the earliest settlements were in the circular pattern, usually arranged around some type of religious building. A geometric pattern is when phenomena are in a regular arrangement, such as the squares formed by roads. This is known as a grid pattern. So top left, we see a linear, top right, we see circular, and lower left, we see this rectangular grid style. There's also places that don't fit a pattern. These are known as random, where phenomena appear to have no order to their position, such as the distribution of pet owners in a city or flowers in a field. Examples of spatial patterns: the 1855 Asiatic cholera in London, where a water pump was identified as the source. Crime hotspots for planning police patrol routes. Effects of weather in the US caused by unusual warming of the Pacific Ocean. Matching patterns of distribution is called spatial association and indicates that two or more phenomena may be related or associated with one another. An example of this is the distribution of malaria, which matches the distribution of the mosquito that carries it. However, you got to be careful because correlation does not automatically mean causation. Another example is the distribution of bike shops in a large city might be similar to the distribution of athletic wear stores. One does not cause the other, but may reflect the distribution of active people. Human-environment interaction. The relationship between humans and the natural world are at the heart of human geography. The connection and exchange between them is called human-environment interaction, specifically sustainability, pollution, and environmental issues. Geographers who focus on how humans influence the physical world often specialize in studying sustainability, pollution, and environmental issues. The study of how humans adapt to the environment is known as cultural ecology. The belief that landforms and climate are the most powerful forces shaping human behavior and societal development is called environmental determinism. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, some people used environmental determinism to argue that people in some climates were superior to those of other climates. In reaction came the view known as possibilism, a view that acknowledges limits on the effects of the natural environment and focuses more on the role that human culture plays. Possibilism is what's made it possible for us to live and get to places we previously wouldn't have been able to. Different cultures may respond to the same environment in different ways, depending on their beliefs, goals, and available technologies. While the environment may set restrictions on human actions, people can adjust to these limitations, which is why most geographers today subscribe to possibilism. The desert gives us limits, but we make it possible to live there without electricity. We make it even more possible for even more people with electricity. Landscape analysis. The word landscape comes from the older Germanic words that refer to the condition, the shape of the land. The term can also imply a specific area, as in a desert landscape or the landscape of Tuscany. The task of defining and describing landscapes is called landscape analysis. The first part of landscape analysis is careful observation. Geographers are keen observers of phenomena and collect data about what they see. The first part of landscape analysis is field observation. The term field observation is used to refer to the act of physically visiting a location, place, or region and recording information there firsthand. Take notes, sketch, maps, count, measure, and interview. For most of the history of geography, this was the only way to gather data about places. All of this information can be tied to specific locations is called spatial data. Modern technology has increased the ways in which geographers can obtain spatial data. Satellites and aerial photography are important sources of observed data available today. Ground-level photography has replaced sketching as the tool for capturing information about landscapes. Sound recordings and the ability to get chemical analysis of air, water, and soil have also changed the way geographers observe a landscape. Once data has been gathered, it must be interpreted. Geographers depend on their skills of synthesizing and integrating or putting together all of the collected information to better understand the place, area, or landscape being studied. A geographer may be interested in understanding what changes are likely to occur as people move into or out of an area. Who are the people migrating into this area? Who is leaving? What are the culture of these groups of people? What are the causes of people moving? These are known as push and pull factors. What types of human-environment interaction are occurring? The built environment. When we use the word environment, we usually think of nature and natural things. Plants, the air, water, and animals are all part of the natural environment. Human geographers often refer to the built environment, by which they mean the physical artifacts that humans have created and that form part of the landscape. Examples of the built environment include buildings, roads, signs, and fences. Here we see the built environment and the natural environment. The built environment varies from place to place. These differences occur because people with different cultures living in different physical landscapes construct buildings, roads, and other elements to create a unique built environment. Anything built by humans is part of the cultural landscape. The cultural landscape includes buildings and things like that. It also includes clothing and agriculture. It includes cultural traditions on beauty and marriage rituals. The concept used to describe the current cultural landscape of a region as a combination of all the cultures which have sequentially occupied the region from the past to the present is known as sequent occupants. Here we can see the sequent occupants of the Romans. We see both the ancient Roman Colosseum style and we see modern buildings in the background. Here we see the traditional French style architecture of New Orleans, also with modern chairs and such outside. Derwent Whittlesey, the geographer who introduced the concept of sequent occupants, drew his inspiration from plant succession, the process by which the type of plants growing in a region changes with time. The notion of sequent occupants believes that a region always shows the remnants of every past civilization. One example of this is in Greece, specifically the city of Athens. We see here the ancient Greek culture of the Parthenon, as we also see the modern style buildings all around it. We also can see it in St. Paul, Minnesota, where we see a historic church that's been built onto to house a school. We can see it in modern-day Sudan. On the banks of the Red Sea, we can see ancient ruins as well as modern-day buildings. The last thing you need to understand for Chapter 1 is the 4-level analysis. One systematic way to study geographic phenomenon is to use this 4-level analysis. The first level is comprehension. You establish the basic information clearly. Those key questions are what, where, when, and the scale. The second level is identification. Identify and describe patterns in the phenomenon. Are phenomena connected? The third is explanation. Explain how individual phenomena might form a pattern. Why is something where it is? How did it get there? And finally, the fourth is prediction. Explain why a pattern is important and predict what it might lead to. So what? What if? What are the effects? This concludes your Chapter 1 notes. You should have completed all of these notes and keep them to help you study for the test.